I believe our kids, or the kids of our kids, have unlocked the secrets of the world we live in. They've asked the questions so many of us weren't allowed to ask growing up, especially religiously. And in my humble opinion, it's these questions that will allow them to grow even more than we can ever imagine. And if we take heed, it'll allow our minds to evolve also. Let's reimagine, for example, this Bible, the Bible. I don't want to disrespect its title or relevance for the value it holds in most households. The Bible has been the standard for the way of life for more than 2,000 years for most people that have lived just as long. Now, things have been removed, as hopefully we all know, including from the Holy Bible we find in hotels and most churches. Some people only value the Old Testament, someone only the New, and some only a version of parts of both. But whatever parts you decide to decipher and call it your truth the Bible becomes. First question, just knowing those facts, how can this book, which is never used in its entirety, be the book of life? But I won't answer that question in this class. That's the student I will have to ask to be removed from my classroom. Now, carry on. How do we know which parts are the parts intended for us to live by? Well, good question. That decision was made for you thousands of years ago by philosophers. One that decided what parts should and should not be included for personal or governmental reasons. Then two, kind of it depends on which side your great ancestors chose during that time. Not saying if they were right or wrong, but whatever part they decided was the right part is the part that was taught as gospel on down the line until now for you and me. Now, there may be some variations in there. Your slave captors may have taught you by force, or you may have lost the war and been converted. But by whatever means, your choice was made for you by people long before you about what part of the Bible you would deem most important. Now, I'm not a historian, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more to unpack there that may enlighten or even anger some people. But you know what I say, learn your history or meet someone who has learned it and doesn't mind teaching it. You'd be surprised. Well, minister, I want to be my own man and stand on my own faith and know God for myself. Make my own choices, not have my choice made by a man thousands of years ago that had no clue about the world today. First off, you said a mouthful and it'll take a while to unpack, but let's take a ride and see what we can do. What we know now versus what we knew then is an unquestionable advantage. If it's when the Bible was written, thousands, if not millions of years ago, then it's really unfair. Can we introduce fire? The Bible starts by saying, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And it goes on to describe what we know now as the sky as heaven, and the ground, land, and sea as earth. The pits of hell later beneath the earth. Times have changed and we have learned many things. While I don't believe science can explain everything, science can disprove some things. We know that we can now pierce the sky and God is not in those clouds with our loved ones looking down on us. We know that we can go pretty far down to the earth's core. And while it is tremendously hot down there, Satan isn't down there burning away partying with our friends from high school and college that never left the life and have to suffer for eternity. I'm a believer still that these places exist for our souls, but not the figuratively first described places from millions of years ago. Then by comparison, we send out a single tweet today, and it can be misinterpreted 500 different ways by the time it reaches millions in a matter of seconds. But millions of years ago, Twitter was not, dare I say, around. If history serves us correctly, communication was more by pictures drawn on rocks or walls, let alone the imagery of beautiful words written on scrolls that would come years later, which would skip several different ways of written communications. So there is Adam and Eve and Cain and Seth, which Cain and Seth married to this other family that I'm sure God had to also create, proving one myth wrong that we all learned as kids, that we all descended from Adam and Eve. There's no real account of how many families were created. I'm sure there wasn't room on the rock for their stories. Stories are either passed down from that point by word of mouth or literally drawings all the way to millions of years later, probably, since there's no mentions of it in the Bible. Post-dinosaur, post-Neanderthals, to the reign of the Egyptians and time of Moses. And that's when some philosophers and Moses also wrote the prize scrolls that eventually become the root of what is later known as the Old Testament of the Bible, with no room for mistakes, human error, or embellishments. And oh, by the way, if you question it, is one of the gravest sins you can ever commit. Twitter versus drawings on the rock. Hard argument. Let's keep it moving. Now, there's a reason I wanted to be called a minister and not a preacher. For one, because to me, a minister can be seen as a teacher, one that can be asked questions and discussed with, whereas a preacher, in my opinion, talks at and teaches by lecture. I enjoy the back and forth between perceived students, but I really enjoy the challenges from other people that disagree with either what I'm saying or my take altogether. I'll address both instances here. With my perceived students or audience, engaging in a classroom type setting allows me to introduce and use the Bible as what I believe its true intention is. You see, as I just sat there and dissected it for the time it was written or what they knew then, I'll now credit it for being way ahead of its time. It's a textbook for the class of life. We have a textbook for various history classes or English classes, math classes. And if you research, you'll see that the origins are from many, many years ago. Who was the father of geometry? An ancient Greek named Euclid, not some guy relevant to life today. When we study geometry, we study back to his teachings or even the Pythagorean theorem. The teacher may present in his or her own way, but the reference is always back to the textbook or teachings of the past. Well, here I am standing in front of my class, and my class is entitled Life 101. It's easy and every student interested can enroll. I'm going to base everything I teach on my own personal experiences, things that I know firsthand of what God is capable of. I know that God is patient. I know He is a healer. I know when all you have tried has failed and every door seems shut, He can make a way out of no way. I've seen when the doctors told me and my family to start planning a funeral, to hours later seeing that same man sitting up in the bed, laughing at how we looked planning his funeral. I know that He can be a lawyer when your lawyer is stumped and jail looks like your only option. I've witnessed Him take hold of the steering wheel and taking me away from death's door. I can tell you He is food when you're hungry. I don't have to look anywhere or read about it to tell you with just a little tiny bit of faith, He can take figurative mountains in your life that seem impossible to move and slide them away that like ice melting on a hot plate. I've seen the storms raging in my life, and it looks like the boat is about to capsize, only to have Him speak peace and things settle like nothing was ever wrong. I've asked Him to silence me, to guide me, to give me strength, to give me patience, to settle my pounding heart. I know what God can do firsthand, and I can teach you all of it without ever opening any book or turning any pages, putting any presentation on the board or slideshows or even movies. But the remarkable thing about all of this is, after I teach you what I know, I have the greatest textbook ever written to reference. You see, when I talk to you about faith and I tell you all I know, I can then tell you for your own extra reading, or if you want to know more about it, jump on over to Job and read about how he persevered when God allowed Satan to take everything from him, and his faith in God, while shaken, still stood fast and anchored in God. Slide over and read the story of Abraham, and while you question the age and validity, just listen to how this man was blessed with a child at a very old age, and because of his faith in God, when God asked him to sacrifice that same child, he didn't even hesitate to walk him up the mountain. Imagine the faith of the Israelites to walk around the walls of Jericho and watch it come crumbling down. Or when I want to speak on the praise and worship or redemption, I would send you over the Psalms and let you read how David would pray, sing, or worship in his writings because his soul would be so happy in God, but also learn he was not perfect, that God called to be great. Then when I want you to know what I dream of for this world after here, I would tell you to go read of heaven in Revelations as John dreamed it, to close your eyes and envision that as a place you could imagine your soul resting after here. The second half is slightly different to this discussion. The reason I love discussing with people that disagree with me or come at things differently is, well, number one, we are all wrong, one way or another. See my point earlier. Everybody took a part of the Bible and went with it. No one is coming to the table with the whole Bible. That and the fact that we are living off the interpretations of word of mouth and drawings over years in multiple languages. No one really knows the honest truth. Never mind the actual manipulations over time. So I welcome different perspectives. I don't aim to disprove anyone. They may aim to disprove mine, and that's fine, because my stance is one that I and I alone stand on, and only I can disprove. I'll provide my statement in closing in just a moment. But what I'm trying to tickle at here, and now I'm just going to bust the door open. As an English professor, you have your way of teaching things, but you get joy going to hear a colleague that has also authored books lecture about their ways also. As a math professor or professional, you enjoy listening to another brag on how they figured this out or found another way to do this or that. Well, that's me. I love to hear others speak on their religious views, no matter the belief, no matter how they have dissected the Bible. You see, there's a universal truth. There's some higher power. Most believe there is one true God, if there's a religious belief at all. Most believe in the historical truth that Jesus Christ existed. Now, we may all disagree to his historical significance, but isn't that the history of the world as we know it? Every historical figure has been seen from, at the very least, two sides. Moses was a great man, but what did those Egyptians that lost their firstborn or husbands in the Red Sea think of him? Hitler goes down by most accounts as one of the worst men in history, but how many people praise him behind closed doors? Presidents' successes and failures here in America simply depend on if you're Republican or Democrat. You would be surprised how one action could be the best thing and worst thing to happen at the same time, depending on who's telling the story. So I'm not surprised that Jesus Christ is seen as the Savior by some, a false prophet by others, and just the man by the rest. But given the fact he existed, there's at least the basis for great debate. I ask this one question. Why do we spend so much time and effort arguing over the past? Not just one generation ago, but generations that we can't even trace ago. Truths we can't even trace ago. Would you go and fight the child of someone your mom or dad fought in first grade? We need to update God's resume. Think about it. We can't apply for a job today and leave out what we have been doing for the past year, let alone 2,000 years ago. We spend our whole lives arguing over which one of our ancestors or the people that made the decisions passed down to us were right. Wars fought over those decisions. Hate created over those decisions. And we pretend like God hasn't done anything else in the last 2,000 plus years. Like we haven't evolved since. Like we can't create and update who he is. A lost art form that I remember growing up is when we had the testimony part of church service or revivals. Everything wasn't planned out. Everyone wasn't the greatest speakers or had the best delivery, but the hidden greatness was that one by one, they were updating God's resume. Instead of getting up and telling you about the wonders of the Bible that the preacher may tell you about later, they told you about what God had done for them, how good it made them feel. Stories you didn't have to read about, but instead hear about them from firsthand experience. Bring back some form of that. Yes, the church service may last a little longer, and you may not be able to squeeze service into that tight window that everyone enjoys, but maybe you should cut back on the lecture and add more time for the update. Just the question, not one I suspect to be answered. If I ever build a church of my own, that's a task I will have to ponder. But in closing, my stance is a simple one. I believe in God. I stand firm on my belief in him solely because of what he has personally done for me. I welcome discussions on what he has done in the past for people and appreciate all that he has done for said people. My concern, though, is what he has done for me, because I can tell you what he has done for me and relate it to what he can do for you. My own past can help prepare you for your future. As I say, the Bible is a book of testimony, great examples of the many wonders of God, so you know what he can do for you. Not for you to emulate what was done in the Bible, but just to know his power. Just as I am a living testimony, one of failures turned into triumphs, sickness turned into health, weakness turned into strength, hate turned into love, ignorance turned into knowledge. I come to minister and teach based on my own testimony. But as I said, I have the greatest textbook ever invented to refer to when you need a reference: the Bible.